My pregnant wife wasn't sure if I was the father, so I arranged a DNA test appointment with her affair partner present. When my wife told me she was pregnant but couldn't confirm I was the father, I didn't yell or break down. I stayed calm, scheduled the DNA test, and made sure her coworker would be sitting right next to us in that clinic waiting room. What happened next destroyed 3 lives in under 2 hours, and I have zero regrets about any of it. I'm a long-haul trucker, 32 years old, and I've been married to Susan for 6 years when everything fell apart. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I thought we had something solid. I was on the road for weeks at a time, hauling freight across state lines, while Susan worked at a logistics company managing shipping schedules. The irony wasn't lost on me later. It started with a phone call I'll never forget. I was parked at a rest stop outside Amarillo, eating a gas station sandwich, when Susan called. Her voice was shaking. "Lucas, I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant." I should have been thrilled. We'd talked about starting a family. But then came the words that made my blood run cold. "I'm not completely sure you're the father." I didn't scream. I didn't hang up. I just sat there, in my cab, staring at the highway, while she explained through tears that she'd been involved with someone from work. His name was Emmett. They'd been seeing each other for months during my long hauls, and there might have been others. She wasn't certain. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life, but I used every single hour productively. I came home early, told Susan I wanted to support her through this, that we'd figure it out together. She seemed relieved, grateful even. She had no idea what I was actually doing. First, I recovered everything. Her phone had cloud backup enabled, which she'd forgotten about. I had access to months of messages between her and Emmett, photos they exchanged, explicit conversations about meeting us while I was hauling cargo through Nebraska or Montana. I found receipts from hotels, restaurants, places they'd gone together on evenings when she told me she was working late or out with girlfriends. I also discovered something interesting. Susan's company had a strict policy against workplace relationships, especially between people in the same department. Emmett was her direct supervisor. That detail became important later. I contacted a lawyer specializing in family law. I explained everything, showed him the evidence I'd compiled. He was impressed by my thoroughness. We began preparing divorce paperwork immediately, but I told him to hold off filing until after the DNA test. I wanted everything to hit at once. I closed our joint bank accounts, transferring my contributions to a new account in my name only. I had documentation showing what I'd deposited versus what she'd contributed. I secured our assets, made sure the house and both vehicles were protected. I even changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. Then I scheduled the DNA test. But here's where I got creative. I'd been tracking Susan's location through our shared phone plan. I knew she was still seeing Emmett, even after confessing the affair to me. She'd meet him during lunch breaks or after work, so I did some research and found out something fascinating. Emmett was engaged. His fiancée was named Alice, and she had no idea her future husband was sleeping with a married coworker. I created an anonymous email account and sent Alice a carefully worded message with enough evidence to make her question things, but not enough to tip my hand completely. Just some screenshots of Susan and Emmett's public social media interactions that seemed a little too friendly, some dates that matched up with times Alice mentioned Emmett working late on her own social media. Alice started digging. She confronted Emmett, who denied everything initially, but Alice was smart. She started watching him more carefully. The DNA test was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at a clinic downtown. I told Susan I'd arranged it, that we needed answers before we could move forward. She agreed, probably thinking she could still manipulate the situation somehow. What Susan didn't know was that I'd also contacted Emmett directly. I sent him a message from a burner phone, pretending to be someone from the clinic, saying there was a complication with Susan's pregnancy and he needed to come in for testing as a potential father. The message included the same date, same time, same clinic. I also suggested to Emmett that he might want to bring support with him, someone who could help him process whatever news he might receive. Emmett brought Alice. The look on Susan's face when she walked into that clinic waiting room and saw me sitting there calmly with Emmett and his fiancée 3 chairs down was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Alice looked confused. Emmett went pale. Susan froze in the doorway. "Susan," I said pleasantly, standing up, "I think you know Emmett. And this must be Alice. Alice, I'm Lucas, Susan's husband. Emmett, Alice is your fiancé, right?" The waiting room went silent. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Alice turned to Emmett slowly. "What is happening right now?" Susan tried to run, actually tried to turn around and leave, but I'd positioned myself between her and the door. "We have an appointment," I said calmly, "for a DNA test, because my wife is pregnant and isn't sure if I'm the father, and I thought Emmett should be here too, since he's been sleeping with her for the past 8 months while I've been working 80-hour weeks to support our household." What followed was chaos. Alice started screaming at Emmett. Susan started crying, trying to explain, making everything worse. Emmett tried to deny it, but I pulled out my phone and started reading their text messages out loud. Explicit messages. Messages about how they couldn't wait for me to leave town again. Messages about the baby, about how Susan hoped it was Emmett so they could finally be together. The clinic staff called security. We were asked to take our situation outside. But by then, Alice had heard enough. She ripped the engagement ring off her finger and threw it at Emmett's feet. She told Susan exactly what she thought of her in language I won't repeat here, and stormed out. Security escorted us to separate areas. The test still happened, with Emmett and me both providing samples, though we were kept apart. Susan sat in a separate room, sobbing. The clinic staff looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Results took 3 days. Those were 3 very long days where Susan tried everything to reach me. Calls, texts, showing up at the house. I'd already changed the locks. My lawyer sent her a formal letter explaining she was not to contact me directly and should communicate only through legal representation. The DNA results came back. Neither Emmett nor I was the father. There was someone else. A third man Susan had been involved with. She'd been juggling at least 3 relationships simultaneously. But here's the twist that made everything even more surreal. By the time the results came back, Susan wasn't pregnant anymore. She'd had what the doctors called a chemical pregnancy, a very early miscarriage that happened shortly after the clinic incident. The pregnancy had never been viable. There was no baby. There never really had been. I filed for divorce the same day I got those results. My lawyer had everything ready. We presented the evidence of adultery, the proof of multiple affairs, the documentation of her deception. Susan tried to claim she deserved half of everything, that she'd supported my career by managing the household. But I had financial records showing I'd paid for 90% of our expenses. I have the house in my name from before we married. Both vehicles were registered to me. She'd contributed almost nothing financially and had actively destroyed our marriage. She tried to claim she needed support because she'd lost income potential due to the pregnancy stress, but she wasn't pregnant anymore, and the court wasn't sympathetic to someone who'd carried on multiple affairs. Meanwhile, her life was falling apart in other ways. I'd sent the evidence of her relationship with Emmett to their company's HR department, along with documentation proving he was her supervisor. Both of them were fired within a week for violating company policy. Workplace relationships were explicitly forbidden between supervisors and subordinates, and they'd been conducting their affair on company time using company resources. Emmett lost his job and his fiancée in the same week. Alice made sure everyone in their social circle knew exactly why she'd called off the wedding. She posted screenshots of the messages I'd shown her, tagged Susan and Emmett, let the whole world see what they'd done. Susan tried to control the narrative on social media, posting cryptic messages about being mistreated, about how I'd abandoned her during a difficult time. But Alice had already poisoned that well. Everyone knew the truth. Susan's friends started distancing themselves. Her family called me privately to apologize, saying they'd had no idea and were ashamed of her behavior. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. I kept the house, both vehicles, my retirement accounts, everything. Susan got nothing except her personal belongings. No shared property settlement, no ongoing support payments. The judge made it clear that her conduct had directly caused the dissolution of the marriage and she was entitled to nothing. She tried one last manipulation, claiming she was suffering mentally and needed financial help for therapy. The court ordered her to seek employment instead. Last I heard, Susan was living in a small apartment on the other side of town, working retail for barely above minimum wage. Emmett moved to another state. Couldn't find work in his field because word got around about why he'd been fired. Alice moved on, started dating someone else, posted photos looking genuinely happy. Me? I spent about a year just focusing on work, rebuilding my life, figuring out who I was without the weight of a failing marriage. Then I met Vivian at a truck stop in Missouri. She was a driver too, running regional routes. We started talking over coffee, exchanged numbers, kept in touch between hauls. A year after my divorce was final, Vivian and I started dating officially. She understands the lifestyle, the long stretches on the road, the challenges of the work. More importantly, she's honest. Brutally, refreshingly honest. She tells me where she's going, who she's with, what she's doing. She shares her location willingly. She answers her phone every time I call. Trust isn't something I give easily anymore. But Vivian has earned it by being consistent, by showing up, by being exactly who she says she is. Looking back, the coldest revenge was simply letting Susan face the natural consequences of her choices. I didn't have to destroy her life. She did that herself. I just made sure everyone could see it happening clearly. Would I do anything differently? Maybe I'd have ended things sooner, trusted my instincts earlier. But ultimately, this taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Document everything. Trust your gut and never let anyone make you feel like you deserve to be treated like garbage. Some people will try to make you the villain for refusing to be their doormat. Let them. You'll sleep better knowing you stood up for yourself. Write what you think about this situation. Also, if you like this video, give a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the bell to receive notifications about the latest videos. See you next time. Bye-bye.